All right, ladies and gentlemen, now that we know that there are two types of cells, both prokaryotic, as you see we're going to begin with on this slide, and eukaryotic cells, and that their primary difference is that the eukaryotic cell has a nucleus and the prokaryotic cell doesn't have a nucleus, let's delve a little deeper into these two types of cells, keeping in mind that most things we talk about in the remainder of this class will revolve around the eukaryotic cell, the one cell that has a nucleus. So prokaryotic cells, what are they all about? Well, this is actually a real image of a prokaryotic cell. Prokaryotic cells are much, much smaller than eukaryotic cells. And we had to take this image of this prokaryotic cell with something called an electron micrograph. So we use an electron microscope and we actually shoot electrons, the subatomic particle, at these cells, and we get kind of an outline of them almost. And this outline is printed onto a photo and we get images like this, and we can see some details of these infinitely small living things. So prokaryotic cells, as we know, they lack a nucleus. And not just a nucleus, they don't have any other organs really inside them. They don't have any organs that have membranes around them, that they are their own structure within the cell. They don't have any of that stuff. They don't have any internal membrane-bound organs. And when we talk about cells and their organs, we just kind of put the two words together and we call these organs inside cells organelles. Okay, so the prokaryotic cell doesn't have a nucleus, and it also doesn't have any other membrane-bound organelles. Now, they do have genetic material. They have the macromolecule known as a nucleic acid in the form of DNA, right? Because all living things have DNA. It's kind of like a prerequisite to, be alive. And the strange part is their DNA is not contained inside a nucleus. That's where the DNA inside eukaryotic cells is, inside the nucleus, but prokaryotic cells don't have that nucleus. So there's no membrane that separates the DNA from the rest of the cell, and it just kind of floats around in the cell. And I'm sorry about the formatting here, folks. When you switch from PowerPoint to Google Slides, it's not always the friendliest. Prokaryotic cells are generally much smaller and simpler than eukaryotic cells. We already kind of talked about how they're much, much smaller, and I think so far you see it doesn't have a nucleus, it doesn't have any other really membrane-bound organelles, organelles that are their own objects, their own structures within itself. I think you're already getting the idea that they are simpler, so just think that prokaryotic cells are smaller, simpler cells in comparison to eukaryotic cells. Okay, prokaryotic cells have a cell wall. Okay, they have a wall-like structure on their outside that makes them a little more rigid and structurally sound than eukaryotic cells. And you can see that in this image. That's why this cell, this prokaryotic cell, is kind of pill-shaped as opposed to a nice oval looking more fluid. The cell wall makes it a little more rigid. Prokaryotic cells also have membranes, so they have a cell wall, and then beneath that they have a membrane made of lipid. And also inside them they have this really important structure called a ribosome that we're going to talk about later. So keep in mind that prokaryotic cells do have a cell wall, but then beneath that they do have a cell membrane like eukaryotic cells, and it is made of lipids as well. Another word for prokaryotic cells is bacteria. Okay, we call prokaryotic cells bacterial cells as well. So if you have a bacterial infection, then you are infected with another living type of cell that probably looks a lot like this guy and is much smaller and simpler than the cells that comprise you and I, which are eukaryotic cells. Speak of the devil, eukaryotic cells are much more complicated than prokaryotic cells. We have some images of eukaryotic cells here. They are much larger than prokaryotic cells, and they are much more complex. Eukaryotic cells have the following: a true nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Now, what I mean by true nucleus is the prefix EU means true, so that's where eukaryotic comes from. We say it has a true nucleus because it is, in fact, a large structure centralized within the cell that houses DNA. And then besides the nucleus, inside of the cell, there are other organelles, other organs that are their own structures, bound by their own membranes that carry out certain functions. And we're going to talk all about those. And in this picture up here in the top right, you can actually see this is taken from our class a few years back. This is a cell as a whole, this lighter blue object, and this is its nucleus in the middle, this dark blue object. So you can see that eukaryotic cells, the cells that make you and I, do have a nucleus. Now, the eukaryotic cell, its nucleus is kept separate from the rest of the cells and the contents within. And remember, the contents within the nucleus are the ever important DNA, the macromolecule nucleic acid, DNA. Plants, animals like us, things called protists and fungi, all are eukaryotic cells or comprised of eukaryotic cells. Those big, complex, nucleus-having cells. Okay, now this is kind of just a refresher from Unit 1. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. If you want to access these on your own, you can feel free to look at these things. But this is what a multicellular organism does. Okay, this is what a multicellular organism can and can't do. Okay, and again, this is a refresher from Unit 1. We are going to stop there, folks. See you in the next one.